At the eastern edge of Grand Canyon, the land does not announce itself with a single story. The road rises through pale dust and juniper, the horizon opens, and the ground seems to fall away in layers of red, grey, and shadow. It is easy, standing there, to imagine that the canyon must be hiding one final answer below its cliffs, a hidden chamber, a forgotten people, a voice from beneath the stone. That is the power of a sentence like this. What did the Navajo say was living beneath the Grand Canyon? It sounds ancient. It sounds specific. It sounds as if the answer is waiting in a cave somewhere below the rim. But before a documentary repeats a question, it has to ask a harder one. Who actually said it? In what public record? About which place? And does the evidence support the words that have been placed in their mouth? For this investigation, the first answer is clear. The public sources reviewed for this film do not establish a Dine teaching about beings living beneath the Grand Canyon. They do establish something more important and more difficult to reduce to a mystery headline. The Grand Canyon is part of a living cultural landscape shared by many nations, including the Dine, known in English as the Navajo. The National Park Service recognizes 11 tribes with historic and continuing connections to the lands and resources within Grand Canyon National Park. Dine people are among them, alongside Havasupai, Hopi, Hualapai, several Paiute communities, Zuni, Yavapai Apache, and others. The canyon is not a blank space waiting for an outsider to solve it. It is not even one indigenous story waiting to be translated into a single answer. That distinction changes everything. When people use the word Navajo as though it describes one interchangeable version of every tradition in the Southwest, they flatten a region of nations, languages, histories, and responsibilities into a costume for somebody else's mystery. A Hopi account is not automatically a Dine account. A Pueblo archaeological site is not automatically a Navajo site. A story recorded by a 19th century visitor is not automatically a public teaching meant to be carried into every new video. The canyon itself asks us to slow down. Its layers took immense spans of time to form. The public record around it is layered too. There are archaeological sites, federal maps, museum photographs, oral histories, tribal partnerships, trail names, springs, art, family knowledge, and places where the proper answer is simply that the information is not ours to demand. This film is about that boundary. It is about what Dine voices and public records do say about the Grand Canyon, what archaeology can show, and why an unsupported claim can spread so quickly when it is attached to a landscape already famous for depth and distance. The first clue is not hidden under the canyon, it is visible at the rim. Desert View lies on the eastern side of Grand Canyon National Park, near the road that connects the park to the Navajo and Hopi reservations. The Park Service describes it as a physical and cultural gateway. That phrase is more revealing than it may first appear. A gateway is not a wall. It is a place where visitors arrive carrying expectations, while people who live in the region bring memory, work, family ties, and obligations that do not begin at the entrance sign. For many visitors, the first encounter with the Grand Canyon is visual. The river is far below. The cliffs look empty from a distance. The scale makes human history seem almost impossible. But the emptiness is an illusion created by distance. Archaeologists have recorded thousands of cultural resources inside the park. Trails, homes, gathering areas, rock art, fields, and artifacts are part of a long human history that the canyon has not erased. The National Park Service says that people have used and occupied the lands that became the park for thousands of years. It also says that some of the tribes connected to the canyon recount creation, emergence, or origin histories tied to this place. That is a public statement of respect. It is not a license to take every origin history, mix it with every rumour about a cave, and call the result a discovery. The difference may sound careful to the point of caution. It is. Caution is not the enemy of wonder. It is what allows wonder to survive contact with the truth. There is still a real question here. If no public source supports the claim about beings beneath the canyon, what does the public record reveal about the Dine connection to it? The answer begins with people who are not presented as relics of an ancient landscape. They are artists, storytellers, families, workers, and community members whose relationship to the canyon exists in the present tense. And that is where the investigation has to go next. The Grand Canyon is often introduced as geology first and human history second, A guide points toward exposed rock layers. A map follows the Colorado River. The numbers become almost too large to picture. But for the people connected to this region, the canyon is not only a cross-section of deep time, it is a homeland, a route, a source of materials, a place of memory, and for many, a sacred landscape. The Park Service's list of traditionally associated tribes matters because it refuses the old habit of giving the canyon a single indigenous owner in the public imagination. 11 nations have cultural connections to the place. Their relationships are not identical, and their public stories do not need to be made identical in order to be respected. The Dine connection is part of that wider truth. In the park's public cultural programs, Dine artists and storytellers appear not as a footnote to a vanished past, but as people carrying skills and language forward. The First Voices series, produced through Grand Canyon National Park, includes Dine storyteller Sunny Dooley. The park describes her as a keeper of Hain, or Blessing Way stories, learned through family transmission. It also places her walking toward the canyon while speaking about language and oral tradition. That public description tells us something significant, even without asking it to reveal more than it offers. Oral tradition is not a loose pile of clues for strangers to arrange into a modern theory. It is a practice of transmission. Someone learns from a parent, an elder, a community, a place, and a language. The setting matters. The person carrying the story matters. The boundaries around the story matter. This is why the phrase "what the Navajo said" is so misleading when it appears without a source. It makes a living people sound like a single anonymous narrator. It also erases the difference between a public statement, a family-held story, a ceremony, a historical record, and an internet rumor. At Desert View, this distinction is visible in another way. The site is connected by road to both the Navajo and Hopi reservations. It has become a place where the park has tried to elevate voices from the tribes traditionally associated with the canyon. Artists demonstrate work. Visitors can encounter contemporary cultural expression. The goal is not to turn the canyon into a museum of frozen cultures. It is to make room for people to speak for themselves. That shift matters because older visitor experiences often did the opposite. Indigenous art and performance were frequently displayed through tourist businesses that controlled the setting, the labels, and the story. A visitor could see something called native culture without learning who was speaking, who had chosen the presentation, or what had been left out. Today, the better question is not, what secret did this landscape hide from everyone else? It is, whose voice is being heard, and under what conditions? For the Dine, the wider region around the canyon is not abstract. Communities on the Navajo Nation live east of the park. Dine artists participate in cultural programs at the canyon. Public park materials describe the canyon as a place with enduring cultural and spiritual connections for the tribes associated with it. None of that proves a sensational underground story. It proves something more solid. The relationship is contemporary as well as historical. This is also where images can mislead. An old black and white photograph of an indigenous family beside stone walls may look like a complete explanation. It is not. A photograph can show clothing, place, posture, and the moment someone pressed a shutter. It cannot by itself tell us the name of every person, the meaning of every object, or which stories were never meant to be extracted from the scene. The same is true of a canyon wall. From a distance it appears to display every layer at once. In reality, each layer requires a method of reading. Geologists ask one set of questions, archaeologists ask another. Communities tied to the land may hold knowledge that cannot be reduced to either one. Good documentary work does not force those methods to compete for a single winner. It identifies what each can responsibly say. The public record gives us one more important fact. The Park Service has documented archaeological resources across the canyon, but intensive survey has covered only a portion of the park. That does not mean every unvisited ledge contains a lost city. It means the canyon is vast, difficult to survey, and full of places that require care rather than conquest. The next part of the story lies in that distinction. Archaeology can reveal long human use of the canyon. It can date materials, map structures, and compare tools, but it cannot turn a rumor into evidence, and it cannot decide what a public oral tradition is supposed to mean for a community that still carries it. To understand why that limit matters, we have to follow the evidence below the rim, not into an invented underground world, but into the real work of reading a landscape without claiming more than it gives us. The Grand Canyon does contain hidden places in the ordinary sense of the word. There are side canyons, springs, ledges, rock shelters, routes above the river, and archaeological sites that most visitors never see. The park is enormous, and much of it is difficult to reach. That fact is real. It is also the reason that vague claims can sound plausible there. But difficulty of access is not evidence of a particular discovery. Archaeology begins with a more disciplined question. What can be observed, recorded, compared, and dated? At Grand Canyon, that work has documented thousands of cultural resources. The Park Service describes a long sequence of human use and occupation, with evidence connected to many cultural groups across different periods. It also emphasizes that the tribes associated with the canyon view the protection of archaeological resources as protection of their heritage. That last point is easy to overlook. Archaeology is not only about finding objects, it is also about deciding what should not be disturbed, what should not be photographed casually, and whose knowledge should guide interpretation. In public descriptions of excavation work along the Colorado River corridor, the Park Service says that archaeology can augment tribal oral histories, and that tribal representatives should be included in research and interpretation. The wording is careful. Archaeology can augment. It does not replace. It does not sit above every other form of knowledge. And it does not give an outsider permission to declare that a sacred story has finally been solved by a shovel. That is the central problem with the claim that the Dine said something was living beneath the canyon. It turns a supposed tradition into a piece of proof for an adventure story. But no public source reviewed for this film connects a Dine teaching to that exact claim. Without a source, the sentence becomes a floating label. It borrows authority from a people without showing where the authority came from. There is a second problem. Grand Canyon traditions are not one interchangeable archive. The park's public materials say that some associated tribes recount creation, emergence, or origin histories within the canyon. That is an important statement. It tells visitors that the canyon can be a place of origin, memory, spirituality, and continuing responsibility. But it does not identify every tradition, disclose every teaching, or invite a documentary to assign a single story to all 11 tribes. The distinction becomes especially important when a story includes caves, underground passages, ancient beings, or hidden chambers. Those images are powerful because the canyon itself has depth. A camera can frame a dark opening in sandstone and make an audience feel that an answer is waiting inside. But a dark opening is not a document. A staged reconstruction is not a record, and an image generated by artificial intelligence is not evidence at all. The better use of an image is to help viewers understand the setting. A map can show how the river cuts through the plateau. A photograph can show the scale of a cliff. A carefully labelled reconstruction can show the kind of fieldwork involved in a survey. None should pretend to prove a story that the sources do not support. There is still mystery in this approach. It is simply a different kind of mystery. How did generations of people travel through a landscape that visitors now experience mostly from overlooks? How are routes, water sources, seasonal changes, and family obligations remembered and taught? How can a park built around public access also protect places whose meaning depends on restraint? Those questions are not weaker than the fantasy of a lost chamber. They are harder because they ask the viewer to accept that the most important thing about a place may not be the thing easiest to turn into a thumbnail. The canyon has more than 4,000 recorded archaeological resources, according to the Park Service, and only a limited portion of the park has received intensive survey. That number should not become an invitation for treasure hunting or speculation. It should make us aware of how much responsibility is attached to the ground beneath our feet. Every site has a context. Remove the object, ignore the community, or invent a story around it, and the context is what disappears first. By now, the first question has changed. We began with a claim about what might be living beneath the Grand Canyon. The evidence has led somewhere else. The public record shows Dine cultural connection, living voices, and a canyon shared by many nations. It shows archaeology that is real but limited. It shows oral tradition that deserves respect but cannot be forced into an unrelated theory. What remains is to return to the rim and answer the question plainly. So what do Dine voices say about the Grand Canyon? The public record does not give us one sentence that can stand in for every Dine person, every family or every teaching. It should not. What it does show is a continuing relationship between Dine people and the canyon region. Communities east of the park, artists and storytellers participating in public programs, cultural and spiritual connections recognized by the National Park Service, and a landscape that remains part of living history rather than a closed chapter. It also shows why the canyon must be understood as more than a Navajo story. 11 tribes are traditionally associated with Grand Canyon. Their histories overlap in place, but they are not interchangeable. The most respectful documentary does not force them into one legend just because a single legend is easier to market. That is why the original claim needs to be set aside. No public evidence reviewed here supports the statement that the Dine said beings were living beneath Grand Canyon. Repeating it as fact would not honour Dine tradition. It would use the name of a people to make an unsupported story sound older and more mysterious. There is a difference between leaving a question open and leaving the truth behind. The canyon contains places that are difficult to access. It contains archaeological sites, springs, trails, and layers of human history that visitors may never see. It contains public oral traditions and cultural connections that cannot be reduced to a map pin. Those facts are enough to create wonder. They do not need an invented creature, a secret chamber, or a borrowed tradition attached to them. The National Park Service now works with the tribes associated with Grand Canyon through consultation, cultural programs, and efforts to present more accurate information to visitors. That work is not perfect, and it cannot undo every older form of misrepresentation, but it points toward a better way of telling the canyon story. Listen to people who are connected to the place, identify the source of each claim, and admit when the answer belongs beyond the edge of public knowledge. At Desert View, the canyon seems to promise a view without limits. The eye follows the cliffs toward the river and then farther, into haze, but every view has a frame. The road, the overlook, the map, the camera, and the question we bring with us all decide what we notice. For generations, many visitors arrived looking for a single Grand Canyon story. Some wanted a geological epic, some wanted an adventure, some wanted proof that something extraordinary had been hidden from them. The more difficult story is that the canyon has never belonged to one kind of evidence. It is a geological landscape, an archaeological landscape, and a living cultural landscape at the same time. That last phrase matters most. Living cultural landscape. It means the canyon is not valuable only because of what happened there long ago. It matters because people remain connected to it now. A Dine artist working near the eastern entrance, a storyteller preserving language, a family travelling across the high desert, a tribal representative protecting a site. None of these are background details. They are part of the answer. If you want to understand why a landscape can hold so many stories, begin by asking who has the right to tell each one. Then ask what the source truly says. A historical record may give a date. Archaeology may give a material trace. A public oral tradition may give a relationship to place. None of those should be made to impersonate the others. The canyon will always have places beyond the reach of a visitor's path. Some will remain unstudied, some will remain protected, some will remain known in ways that are not meant for a documentary. That is not a failure of history. It is part of respecting a place larger than our need for an answer. The most honest conclusion is also the strongest one. The Dine connection to Grand Canyon is real. It is public, living, and recognized. The claim about beings beneath the canyon is not supported by the public sources reviewed for this film. Between those two facts is a better kind of mystery. Not what we can invent about a hidden world, but how much meaning a real landscape can hold when we finally stop asking it to tell only our version of the story. If this investigation changed the way you see the canyon, consider subscribing to Navajo Echoes. And if you have a public record, place, or historical question you would like examined with the same care, leave it in the comments.